This is just coffee. You want this?
Yes.
Fidget. Hey YouTube, what's going on? My name's Austin Savage. I am the founder of Savage Content Collective, and it is so good to have you here today. Today we are talking about consistency, podcast downloads, and patience, and how all of those things work together. So often we talk to businesses who are looking for that silver bullet. And it's easy to approach content the same way, right? We're looking for that piece of content that is going to go viral, or we're looking for something to perform way better than everything else does. And honestly, that's just not how it works. Sure, you might have a piece of content that does great, that performs well, that has more listens, but more often than not, that doesn't completely, affect the next thing that you release or the next piece of content. For the vast majority of creators, approaching your content engines with the perspectives of consistency and patience is what will lead to the long-term results. So let me give you some examples. Right here, this is the 95 podcast. It's the first podcast I ever hosted, launched with the nonprofit I worked at before my business. Episode 1 that we released had about 100 listens to it. We had, spent a year and a half to 2 years building an audience already. We had a built-in audience. We had about 100 listens to episode 1. And then, as is typical for most podcasts, a little quick tip for you. You have a lot of listens on episode 1, and it's going to drop down for episode 2. And so episode 2, we saw about 65, 70 listens to the podcast. That podcast has been released every single week for the most part for the last 2 years. Today, they see about 340 listens per week. That's consistency. Here's a client podcast we manage. This is called the No More Perfect podcast. When we first chatted about this podcast, she had already had a lot of consistency. She had a brand before. She had already actually been doing the podcast before we started managing it. And in a lot of ways, had seen some success. But there was kind of the, off and on kind of schedule. Sometimes it would be released on Tuesday, sometimes on Wednesday. Sometimes they'd miss a week, but it was totally cool. Tried to be flexible with it, which is great. And they saw, when we started, they saw about 1,100 downloads a week on the No More Perfect podcast. For the last year and a half, we have released an episode every Tuesday at 4 a.m., except for maybe one around Christmas or something. And we have seen that downloads number go from 1,100 a week to consistently over 2,000 every week. That is the power of consistency. Here is another podcast we manage called the Holy Well podcast. When we first started, she had 3 or 4 episodes actually already out. And kind of the same thing as before. It had probably been a month since she released an episode. It was a project she would do when she had time. And she had some downloads, right? She had probably 30 or 40 listens to each episode, which for a new podcast is actually pretty standard. That is a great start. For the past year, we have released an episode every other Thursday consistently. It's a bi-weekly podcast. We've ramped up that consistency, brought in, some other things like email and social consistency as well. And all of those things have worked together to increase listens on her podcast. She now consistently sees about 80 to 150 downloads each episode. That's the power of consistency. Here's another podcast we support. It's called the Forgotten Podcast. This is an organization that has been around for a decade. They've been doing ministry for about 10 years, and they have a fairly large audience already. They have about 16,000 followers on Instagram. They have a pretty solid email list, and just have done the work, put in the time to get the momentum behind them. They have actually been doing this podcast for about 3 or 4 years now. And they actually already had a lot of the consistency already nailed down when we started supporting them. We just got to come in and help them kind of carry that forward. But they have seen consistent growth through consistency. They have released an episode every other Monday for 3 or 4 years now. And that consistency has just helped them gain momentum. Their audience knows what to expect. And this podcast now sits at 700,000 total downloads with close to 20,000 downloads a month. And that is the power of consistency. We see this over and over again. We see it not just for podcasts, we see it on social. When our clients start posting consistently, they see more growth. We see it for blogs. When clients start posting more blogs consistently, they see more growth, more people reading. When clients start sending emails more frequently, they see more growth. See, kind of like the flawed perspective of content marketing is that it is investing in a bunch of quick wins, but that is not the case. Content marketing is all about patience. It's all about the long game. It's about choosing a rhythm and sticking with it, not focusing so much on quality that you can't keep a consistent rhythm, and not focusing too much on quantity that you're not burning yourself out. It's simply the value of consistency and patience in your own content. Be consistent, choose a rhythm and stick with it. Don't try to burn yourself out. If that's 2 posts on social a week, that's fine. If that's 1 podcast every other week, that's great. If that's 1 article a month, that is fine. But choose a rhythm and stick with it. And on the other side, then be patient. You're not gonna see results right away. These podcasts didn't grow by 1,000 downloads just from being consistent for 1 month. This took a year, 2 years, 3 years for them to get to this place. And so we have to be patient. We have to be willing to play the long game and understand that a lot of those wins are going to come through our consistency, not just the quality of 1 piece of content. Be consistent and be patient. Hey, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend, do all the things. I really appreciate you watching, and I will see you right back here very soon.